The tray rattled in Emma's hands as the man's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade. He wasn't lowering his tone, he was raising it, loud enough that the couple at the next table froze with their forks halfway to their mouths. Heads began to turn, conversations faded. Emma stood rooted to the spot, her cheeks hot, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the clinking of silverware. The man sat in a dark suit, his tie pulled tight, a gleaming watch catching the warm glow of the lights every time he lifted his hand to point at her. His expression carried the smug certainty of someone used to being obeyed. "Do you have any idea how much of my time you've wasted?" he barked, his words sharp enough to echo off the walls. "People like you are the reason nothing ever gets done right." Emma's throat tightened. She had been here before, serving customers who thought a uniform made her invisible, who thought they could toss their anger onto her like trash on a plate. But this felt different. This wasn't impatience, this was about power. About making sure she knew her place. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to press down on her at once. The little girl in the corner booth leaned against her mother's arm, whispering something Emma couldn't hear. A man at the bar shook his head, but no one said a word. They were waiting, watching. And in that pause, Emma's mind slipped, not to the glass of wine trembling on her tray, not to the sting of humiliation flooding her chest, but to everything that had brought her here. The night she spent working double shifts, the stack of medical bills waiting on her mother's kitchen counter, the way she woke up each morning telling herself to keep going no matter how tired she felt. The man leaned closer across the table, his voice low and cutting. "Look at you. You'll never be more than a girl carrying plates." Emma's breath caught, her fingers tightened on the tray. She didn't know what she was about to say, but she knew one thing with certainty: silence couldn't last forever. Emma swallowed hard, the sting of his words still hanging in the air. For a second she thought about answering, but nothing came. And in that silence her mind slipped again. Not because she wanted to escape, but because that man's voice struck a place she knew too well. She wasn't just a server in a black apron. She was a daughter holding up the fragile pieces of a life that never seemed to stop breaking. Her mum's illness had taken more than health. It had taken steady paychecks, stability, the warmth of knowing bills would be covered. Her father had been gone for years, leaving Emma with the role of caretaker before she was even ready to take care of herself. That was why she worked the morning rush at the coffee shop and came straight here at night. That was why she dragged her textbooks into the kitchen after midnight, studying with her head nodding against the table, only to wake up and do it again. Rent, medicine, tuition. None of it waited, none of it cared how exhausted she felt. Her mum always told her, "Money comes and goes, Emma, dignity is forever." And maybe that was why these words cut so deep now. Because they weren't just about slow service or a late glass of wine. They were about who she was. They were about stripping her down until she felt smaller than the shoes she stood in. Emma blinked and forced herself back into the room. The man was still staring at her, waiting for her to break. Around him, the restaurant sat in thick silence, the kind that told her she was standing at a crossroads, and she could already feel it. The moment was building. If she stayed quiet, she would walk home carrying more than just exhaustion. She would carry shame. But if she spoke, everything might change. The man leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest like a judge ready to hand down a sentence. His voice carried just enough to remind everyone listening that he wanted an audience. "This is exactly what's wrong with people these days," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "No discipline, no respect for time. You think you can just stumble through life, and someone like me won't notice?" A low murmur rippled through the restaurant. The couple nearest his table exchanged a glance. The bartender paused mid-polish, his rag hovering over the glass. Even the kids in the corner booth had stopped fidgeting, their wide eyes locked on the scene. Emma set the tray carefully on the edge of the table, her hands shaking despite every effort to look steady. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe. The man wasn't finished. He leaned forward now, his watch catching the light as he jabbed a finger toward her. "You'll never get anywhere like this. People like me built everything you see. And people like you. He let the words hang for a beat, his eyes narrowing. You'll always just be cleaning up after the rest of us. The insult landed heavy, louder than the words themselves. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One young man near the bar muttered something under his breath, but no one dared to speak up yet. Emma's chest tightened. She had been insulted before, but never like this. Not with so many eyes watching, not with words designed to strip away her worth piece by piece. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to shrink into herself. And then her gaze caught the little girl again, peeking around her mother's arm. Those wide eyes didn't just hold curiosity, they held expectation. They were waiting to see how Emma would respond. Emma's hands pressed against the tray, knuckles white, her pulse thundering. She didn't know what words she might find, but one thing was certain. Silence was no longer an option. The man tapped his fingers against the table, a steady rhythm meant to remind everyone he was still in control. "Do you know what separates me from you?" he said, his voice cool now, almost casual. "I'll leave this place tonight and step into a world you'll never touch. And you'll still be here, carrying plates." The words cut deep. A couple nearby looked down at their menus as if embarrassed for her. The bartender froze mid-step. Emma felt the weight of every stare pressing on her shoulders. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she considered bowing her head, saying nothing, letting the night pass so she could keep her job and pay the bills waiting at home. But then she thought of her mother, sitting in their small apartment, folding the same medical bills into neat stacks because that was the only way to keep them from feeling like mountains. She thought of the nights she dragged herself home after a double shift. Textbooks spread across the kitchen table until her eyes refused to stay open. She thought of how hard she had fought just to stand here at all. Her hand tightened on the tray, the tremble in her fingers stilled. She lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "Sir," she said, each word measured, "I may be carrying plates tonight, but that doesn't make me less than you." The room froze. Forks hovered above plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Emma could hear her own heartbeat, steady now, not frantic. She drew another breath, her voice growing firmer. "I come here after school every night so my mum can afford her medicine. I work hard and I'm proud of that. You can insult my job, but you can't take away my dignity." The man's smirk faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came. And in that pause, the silence of the restaurant shifted. It no longer weighed on Emma, it weighed on him. A laugh slipped from the man's throat, sharp and hollow. He leaned back in his chair, slow claps echoing against the polished wood. "That was quite a speech," he said, his words dripping with mockery. "But let's not forget, you're still here to serve me. That's all this is." The couple closest to him stiffened. The woman pressed her lips together, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. Across the room, the young man at the bar muttered, "Unbelievable!" But he kept his eyes down. The air inside the restaurant thickened, heavy with the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. The man reached for his water glass, lifting it with deliberate slowness. He took a sip, then set it back down with a sharp thud, splashing droplets across the white tablecloth. His eyes flicked up to Emma, daring her. "Now," he said smoothly, "why don't you clean that up? That's what you're here for, isn't it?" Emma's chest tightened. Her instinct screamed at her to grab a napkin to wipe the mess quickly to make it all go away. That was what she had always done, fix, apologise, move on. But this time her feet didn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of the tray, her knuckles pale, but her eyes stayed locked on his. For the first time, she didn't feel small. The silence that had once pinned her down now seemed to wrap around him instead. The man's smirk faltered just slightly, the confidence in his gaze flickering like a flame against the wind. He drummed his fingers once more, but the sound felt thinner, less certain. And in that fragile pause, the balance of the room began to shift. Emma didn't reach for the glass. She didn't move at all. Instead, she drew in a breath so deep it steadied the tremble in her hands. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it was strong enough to carry to every table. "Sir," she said, meeting his eyes, "I came here tonight to serve food and drinks, not to be treated like I don't matter. I won't let you take away my dignity." The man blinked, caught off guard. His smirk slipped, just for a heartbeat, before he straightened in his chair. Emma pressed on, her voice steadier now. "I work 2 jobs. I go to class when most people are still asleep. And I come here every night so my mum can afford her medicine. That doesn't make me less than you, that makes me stronger than you think." The restaurant fell into complete silence. Even the children in the corner booth leaned forward, wide-eyed, as if they understood something important was happening. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was strength, raw and new, but real. She stood tall, the tray balanced easily at her side, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel like she was standing alone. The man opened his mouth, ready to snap back, but nothing came. And in the quiet that followed, it was clear, the power in the room had shifted. The silence held, thick and unbroken, until the scrape of a chair cut through it. At a corner table, an older man pushed himself to his feet. He wasn't flashy, just a local in a button-down shirt with sleeves rolled neatly at the wrists, the kind of man who looked like he'd spent his life working with his hands. Emma had seen him before. He was a regular, often coming in with his wife for dinner after long days at his auto shop down the street. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but calm. "I've been eating here for years. I've watched kids bussing tables, servers carrying plates till their backs ached. And I'll tell you one thing, they work harder in one night than most people work all week." His gaze shifted from Emma to the man in the suit. "She doesn't owe you her pride just because you ordered dinner." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. A few customers nodded. The young man at the bar muttered, "That's right," under his breath. Even the mother in the booth pulled her daughter closer, whispering something soft but proud. The man in the suit stiffened, his face tightening. "This isn't your business," he snapped, his voice higher than before, betraying the edge of frustration. But the older man didn't back down. He kept his voice calm, almost gentle. "It's everybody's business when someone forgets that the person serving them is still a human being." The restaurant wasn't silent anymore. It was shifting, a current pulling against the man in the suit, lifting Emma higher than she had stood all evening. And in that moment, for the first time, he wasn't just fighting her, he was fighting the room. The man's jaw tightened as the older customer's words echoed through the room. He scanned the tables around him, searching for one nod, one sympathetic face that might prove he was still in control. But all he saw were steady eyes, waiting, unflinching. Some looked disappointed, others outright disgusted, but not a single one came to his defense. His smirk faltered. He straightened in his chair, tugging at his jacket like he could stitch his pride back together with a single gesture. "You people don't get it," he said, his voice louder now, more desperate than commanding. "I've worked for everything I have. Without men like me, places like this wouldn't even exist." But the words fell flat. No applause, no agreement. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the weight of silence pressing down on him. Emma didn't move. She didn't need to. Her stillness was louder than anything she could have said. The tray rested steady in her hands, her chin lifted just enough to show she wasn't afraid anymore. The man's eyes flicked to her again, but this time they didn't hold the same confidence. He drummed his fingers on the table, then stopped, realizing the sound only made the silence thicker. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Finally, with a sharp scrape of wood against the floor, he shoved his chair back. He pulled a few bills from his wallet and dropped them onto the table with more force than necessary, the money crumpling as it landed. "Keep it," he muttered, though his voice cracked at the edges. He shrugged into his jacket, movement stiff, his gaze darting around the room one last time as if hoping someone, anyone, would look at him with respect, but no one did. Emma met his eyes as he turned toward the door. She didn't glare, she didn't smile, she just held his gaze, steady and calm, until he finally looked away. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped outside, and just like that, the storm he had carried with him all evening was gone. Inside, the restaurant seemed to exhale at once, a dozen breaths finally released after being held too long. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The door had closed behind him, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Then a sound broke through the stillness, the soft clap of a single pair of hands. The older man who had spoken earlier nodded toward Emma as he applauded once firmly. Others followed. A couple at a nearby table added their hands, hesitant at first, then stronger. Soon, the sound spread in ripples across the dining room, not loud, not wild, but steady and genuine. It wasn't applause for a performance, it was for her. Emma stood frozen, her tray balanced against her hip, her throat tight. She hadn't expected anything, she hadn't spoken for recognition. But hearing it now, she felt her chest ache in a way that was almost too much to bear. One of her co-workers slipped out from behind the counter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he whispered. Emma nodded quickly, though her eyes stung with unshed tears. At the bar, the young man in the hoodie lifted his phone. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum. "I recorded part of that. People need to see what you said." He looked at her as if asking permission, not assuming it. Emma blinked, startled. The idea of her words travelling beyond these walls hadn't even crossed her mind. She had spoken because she couldn't stay silent, not because she wanted anyone to notice. But now, looking around at the faces still watching her, the nods of respect, the quiet smiles, she realised maybe it was bigger than just this room. The manager, who had been silent through most of the ordeal, finally stepped forward. His tone was softer than Emma had ever heard it. "Take a few minutes," he murmured. "You've earned it." Emma nodded again, setting the tray aside. As she slipped into the back hallway, she let herself breathe, her chest rising and falling in uneven waves. She didn't know what would come of the video. She didn't know if tomorrow she'd regret speaking up. But in that moment she carried one simple truth. The man had walked out, and she was still standing. When Emma walked into the restaurant the next evening, something felt different. The usual clinking of silverware and low chatter was still there, but the way people looked at her had changed. Customers who might once have glanced past her now met her eyes, offering small smiles, nods of respect. A woman at table 4 said softly, "You did the right thing," as Emma poured her water. Even the cook in the back gave her a quiet thumbs up when she passed through the kitchen. She carried her tray with steady hands, her head held just a little higher than before. It wasn't about pride, it was about knowing she hadn't let herself be broken. Later that night, when she finally got home, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emma sank into the worn kitchen chair, her mother sitting across from her in the dim light. On the screen were dozens of notifications, messages from classmates, old friends, even strangers. "Saw the video? You were incredible. I've worked in restaurants for 10 years. Thank you for saying what we all feel. My daughter watched this and said she wants to be brave like you." Emma scrolled slowly, stunned. The shaky video had already been shared thousands of times. People weren't just watching, they were telling their own stories, pouring out the things they had swallowed in silence. Her mother reached across the table, placing a thin, gentle hand over hers. "Do you remember what I told you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Money comes and goes. Dignity is forever. Last night you didn't just keep your own, you gave it back to others too." Emma felt her eyes burn as she squeezed her mother's hand. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was barely hanging on. She felt like she had stood for something that mattered. The next morning, she tied her apron again and stepped out the door, not knowing what the day would bring. But she carried one truth with her. No suit, no watch, no amount of money could buy the respect that came from simply standing tall. And as she walked back into the restaurant, greeted by nods and smiles, Emma knew her mother had been right all along. Dignity wasn't something you earned from others. It was something you refused to give away. And so, Emma's story reminds us of something simple, yet powerful. Respect cannot be measured in money, titles, or status. True dignity lives in the way we choose to carry ourselves, even when others try to tear us down. But here's the question I'll leave with you tonight. When the moment comes, will you stay silent to keep the peace, or will you find the courage to stand tall, like Emma did? Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart, carry your dignity with you, and we'll meet again right here on Rain Inside.